The meeting will begin in 1 minute. The meeting will begin in 1 minute. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Welcome to our Sioux Falls City Council informational meeting. Today's date is Tuesday, September 30th. Welcome to those of you who are in attendance here at Carnegie. We appreciate your interest in city government, as well as anybody that might be watching on CityLink or on our web stream. We'll start with City Council open discussion. Councilor Staggers.
Yes. Last Friday there was a trial here in Sioux Falls in Courtroom 3C down at the courthouse, the trial of the City of Sioux Falls versus Bruce Danielson. This was a criminal case. What makes it even more difficult to understand, it was a criminal case in which Bruce Danielson supposedly violated city ordinance for having building supplies in the back of his yard. The back of his yard that was fenced in with a 6-foot fence. So what happened was the trial lasted all day, but Danielson's attorney was able to convince the judge that he had not violated city ordinance at all. And also at the same time, his lawyer also demonstrated that the code enforcement officer from the health department didn't even have a clue as to what state law said about this particular matter. So I think what we have to take very seriously here in the future is when the city goes after a citizen, that the city really knows what's going on, because it was quite apparent that when it came to city ordinances, the city didn't have a case. At least that's what the judge ruled. Also, at the same time, you're sitting there wondering, what are we spending thousands of dollars on this particular case? Once again, dealing with building supplies in the backyard of somebody. What we also should be doing is focusing on trying to clean up some of these city ordinances to make them clearer and more precise so we have better law. But anyway, at least I'm happy the judge made a good decision here in ruling that he was innocent. And this finally ends, I think, a conflict that existed between Bruce Danielson and his neighbors for 20 years. It's finally over with, I think.
Comments, questions? Other open discussion? All righty, we'll move into our agenda. Today we have presentations. We'll start with our monthly financial report. Director Turbach, welcome.
Good afternoon. Tracy Turbach with the Finance Office. Even though it's the 30th of September, we're providing the August financial report. And we were scheduled to be here a week ago, and I know there was a scheduling conflict with the agenda, so we pushed it back a week, but we're happy to be here today to review the economic indicators that we do track, touch on the year-to-date general fund results for revenues and expenditures, and then move to questions, see what's on your minds today. So with that, looking at the unemployment rate, when I presented last month's report, I mentioned that the July number had gone down in our local MSA to 2.7%. So that's reflected on this graphic now this month. That is as low as it's been in a number of years. You can see that the trend throughout the year typically is for the rate to go down. We did get the August numbers just, I think, late last week or early this week. They came out. It did tick up slightly to 2.9%, so that's what you'll see on the next month's update. But again, very, very solid unemployment numbers reflecting a very strong local economy. Building construction continues to have a very solid year. Lots of activity in issuing building permits. Through August, nearly $397 million of construction activity has been permitted. That's still running at just under 90% of the rate of last year through August, and somewhat ahead of 2012 at about 132% of where we were at the end of August 2012. One thing I might point out is that this year, that's kind of an anomaly, is the number of roofing permits that are being issued. We're seeing 2 to 3 times the normal, or what you might consider normal, number of permits for re-roofing buildings, clearly related to the hailstorms that we had in June. In fact, nearly 6,000 permits for roofing. As I say, that's about 2 to 3 times what we would normally see at this point. So that's generating a lot of business for our building services department, issuing a lot of additional permits above and beyond what the normal level of activity would entail. Sales taxes continue to roll along in a very positive way. We're seeing our growth, our 12-month growth rate ticked up again slightly this month from 6.3 to 6.4%. Which is exactly where we were a year ago. Last August, our 12-month rate was also at 6.4%. So we're seeing continued very steady growth in our general sales taxes. In the case of our entertainment taxes, through August, we're at 5.7%. Again, that's on a 12-month rolling basis. Last month, when I reported to you, was at 5.1. So that was a fairly significant move in the positive direction on our entertainment tax sales. We are just very slightly ahead of the rate we were at 12 months ago. Looking now at the general fund, revenues and expenses. Again, as I mentioned in my monthly report to you, the written report and the cover letter on that, things are tracking exactly as expected in terms of comparing to last year and comparing to our budget for this current year. On the revenue side for the general fund, we've through August had $82.6 million in revenue, which is up about almost $2.5 million for the first 8 months compared to last year. That's about a 3% increase. We are at 60% of budgeted revenues through August, and a year ago through August we were at 62%. So again, very much on track with where we would expect to be. On the expenditure side, our expenditures through August are down slightly from the first 8 months of last year, about $400,000 or a little less than 0.5%. That's clearly related to the ice storm that we had in 2013. Through August, we've spent 63% of our budget, which is exactly where we were a year ago in relation to 2013, 63% of our budget. So with that as kind of a brief overview, I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you folks have today.
Council, questions? Councilor Jameson.
Tracy, when somebody does a roof, reshingling a roof, is there any sales tax that's collected in that process? I just can't even. I suppose if somebody did it on their own, but if they hired a contractor, what revenues would the city?
Well, I believe when they purchased the shingles, there would be sales tax involved.
If the home
generally, realty improvements, the cost of having realty improvements made are not subject to sales tax.
Is it excise tax?
Contractors, excise tax, yes, 2%. Mm-hmm.
But we don't get that.
Well, we don't receive that, but I mean,
We do no, that does not come to the city. That stays with the state.
just on a connected note to that, I know that there's a huge influx of those permits being pulled for those roofs, and it's kind of swamped the planning department or the zoning, the building permit people downtown. And others are now struggling to get building permits through. It would be interesting to find out how they were able to manage. I think you referred to 3 or 4 times the number of permits that they normally get in a year. I mean, it's an overwhelming effort that they're undertaking there, and it's impacting others who are trying to do other projects. I received a phone call today regarding that. But I think it would be good for us to know how they are handling that, because if there was another storm event like that, is there anything we could do to prepare for that in the future? Tornado or something to come through, how could we prepare that department to handle such an influx? But that's all I had.
If I could piggyback on that, Councilor Jamison, I know Sioux Falls are somewhat unusual in that we require building permits for re-roofing a house, what would be considered a normal maintenance item. Most other municipalities do not require a building permit to re-shingle your house. And I had a hard time with trying to bring that issue up where it could be discussed, and it might be something that we could discuss, because it adds an extra layer of bureaucracy simply to do simple maintenance to your house. So I think it'd be a good subject to talk about, and I think we need to probably take that to our land use, and let's discuss why we do and what the implications would be of not doing that. So,
Do you know what the cost is for a permit, Dean?
I'm not sure the cost per permit. I don't know if it's a percentage of the value that's being done. So
Probably only $10.
Yep.
17 bucks.
Any other questions regarding the budget? I just have one, Tracy. I'm just looking at the year-to-date expenditures by month, and we had the ice storm last year, and we had $16 million in May, which I don't know if that's when I'm just looking at the inconsistency, I guess, from 2013 to 2014. I'm wondering why we're jumping around so much on our expenditures, and there's so much difference from last year. Anything we can take from that?
One thing I know that tends to skew that a couple times throughout the year, or when the payroll dates fall, there are a couple months every year where we have 3 payrolls as opposed to 2, and so that may not be the same month then the following year. So that if you're looking at it on a month-to-month basis, that may be at least some of the explanation of what you're asking about.
That would make a lot of sense. So like March, we went from 9 million to 14 million last year to this year, and in June we were at 14 million and we went down to 9 million. So that, yeah, okay. Some logic there. Any other questions? All righty. Thank you very much, Tracy.
Thank you.
Our next presentation will be an update on proposed deer management. Chief Barthel, welcome, sir.
Good afternoon, Doug Barthel, Police Chief. Just wanted to update you a little bit on where we're at with our deer management plan, and then also talk about a proposed ordinance. First off, just to kind of cover a few of the basics on it. As you probably have heard, we've had some concerns with the growing deer population in our city. Just in 2013 alone, we had over almost $200,000 in vehicle damage due to collision with deer. We know we aren't going to totally eliminate the deer problem, but we just want to find a kind of a socially acceptable number that is agreeable for both sides, and so that we know that the deer, I mean, just due to the nature of our city with a river running through it, we aren't going to be able to totally get rid of the deer, but hopefully get it with a manageable number. The main areas of concern that we're talking about with this current plan is the southern part of the city, and probably more specifically the southeast part of the city as it runs along the river, basically from about 26th Street from Norland Rotary Park as it wraps around to about Yankton Trails Park and up into the neighborhoods south and east of there. We've done a couple of non-scientific deer counts. We actually did one back in June on 2 different days. On one day in that area we counted about 32 deer, and another day we counted about 42. Here, just like within the last week or two, we did another count in the same area, and both times it was real close to about 60 deer in and around that area. We're going to do another count probably within the next month or two. We do know that the deer numbers go up in the winter because they're easier to count, they congregate, they're easier to see it when, when there isn't a lot of foliage and snow on the ground. So we're quite certain that those numbers are definitely higher than that. But so a couple of the approaches that we're looking at doing with this, one of them is a proposed feeding ban, which we're going to be talking about here in a little bit. Public education piece where we've shared with the public other ways that you can control the deer through different types of plantings, fencing, those sort of things, resistant gardens. And another important piece is also getting public input on this. We did that through 2 different methods. First off, everybody that lives in that area, we sent all of them a postcard encouraging them to go online and take our survey. If they didn't want to do it online, they could have gone to the public libraries. There were written forms where they could do it. And then we also conducted 2 sessions where the public could come and meet with both our staff and Game Fish and Parks and our animal control folks and explain all of this, plus answer any questions that they have. We did that on 2 separate nights in 2 different weeks and had pretty good turnout and answered a lot of questions there. The survey, which we just wrapped up here about a week or so ago, was on the website for several weeks. I'll share those results with you here in just a second. But ultimately, as we go through this and when we decide what actions we would like to take, any lethal removal of deer is going to require the state approval through Game Fish and Parks, and that's why we've worked very closely with them, and a lot of the steps that we have taken have been at their recommendation. So if ultimately that's the action that we take, they'll be the ones that will issue the permits to do that. And when we do that, if that is the action that we end up with, it'll be performed by police officers. We're going to do it in a very safe environment and manner. It's not going to be an open public hunt. We aren't going to do it with bow and arrows. We'll likely bait the deer into an area, so it's going to be a very close shot, more than likely from an elevated position, so we're shooting into the ground. It'll probably be with a silenced gun or a suppressed gun, so it's not going to cause a lot of concern. And we would do this either late this year or the beginning part of next year. So a lot of these areas aren't going to see as much activity, and probably might even do it in the nighttime hours with some sort of night vision, so to minimize any sort of public impact with it. And then any deer that we actually do harvest, we would, that deer is going to be, we are working on agreements with Sportsmen Against Hunger to pay for the processing, and then the deer would just get donated to the needy. So certainly would go to a good cause that way. But just to cover a little bit of the survey, we had about 944 people take the survey, and of those that took the survey, about 54% say that the deer numbers have increased over the last 5 years, according to their findings. But then we also asked, what was if you had deer on your property, what was the extent of damage due to deer? And 52% said they at least had some damage on their property, moderate or extensive. And then probably the biggest question in there, it was just a very short survey, but the biggest question was, do you support or oppose lethal removal of deer? And of those that that took the survey, 58% support lethal removal and 35% oppose, and the rest were neutral. Ironically, I also had them run the numbers. That's when you take into account everyone that took the survey. There's maybe 4 or 5% that were outside of the city limits that took the survey. So it was mainly Sioux Falls residents, but I mainly wanted to know those that have deer on their property and have damage to their property, how how do they feel about lethally removing the deer? And so when we carved out everybody else, the numbers were almost identical. It was still about 58% approve of some type of removal of the deer. So one of the key pieces to this this whole plan is a feeding ban. It's important that we don't continue to draw the deer into the city and into some of the neighborhoods. We've heard stories and actually have seen cases where there are some residents who literally will put out a feeding trough and fill it with corn and other food for the deer. And while that's great, they get to see the deer, but it's just causing more and more to congregate. And there are some people who have yards that are literally down to dirt because of the deer that go through there, and they frankly can't plant anything unless they put fencing around it or it's something that the deer don't like. So it's very frustrating for them. So on top of the damage that we have with the vehicles, we've got a lot of property damage, and I know people like to look at them, but it's pretty clear that the majority of folks would like us to do something to try and control that. But with us today is Keith Allenstein. He's going to talk about the proposed ordinance change. But first, we have Emmett Keyser with us. He's the regional supervisor for Game Fish and Parks, and so Emmett's going to just briefly talk about their perspective on a few of these. So. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, councilmen and women. It's my first time being before the council, and appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about the city deer management issue. We've been working with the city police department and staff over the last few months, and I want to report that the relationship has been extremely good, and the city's been extremely cooperative in trying to develop a good public involvement plan, I think, along with a deer management plan. Obviously, this feeding ordinance is a part of the overall deer management plan, and we certainly want to appear in support of that. Anytime that the deer are fed, of course, it increases the likelihood of deer moving between neighborhoods, would cross public streets, and certainly be exposed to being stricken by a motor vehicle. So that's one of the issues. But we also know that congregating deer increased the damage, and we did hear from quite a number of people, as the Chief pointed out, at the public meetings that we held, and there was some pretty good concern about the deer numbers in the city. And I guess the final thing that we would see as a benefit in terms of just to the deer themselves of a feeding ban would be the fact that the less nose-to-nose or deer-to-deer contact we have, the less likelihood we have of disease transmission between animals, and so that's a very important part of course, deer management. As I said, the city staff have been extremely helpful. The last evening we held our meeting with our hunters. We actually have a archery management program up in the northeast corner of the city. Many you may know about, and that's gone extremely well. And we'll have another meeting tonight with the remainder of the hunters and hand out their permits and the parking passes and so forth. But we think that's an important part of deer management here in the city, and certainly would encourage, if there are additional opportunities for that kind of management, we'd certainly encourage that and support those opportunities. The hunters who appeared last night, it was my first meeting with the hunters. I've only been in town here as regional supervisor for 2 months, so I'm relatively new back to the city. I am a former resident, Lincoln Patriot, graduate of Lincoln High, so it's nice to be back and see the changes in the city. But the sportsmen, I think, across the state would be supportive if we could, open other areas of the in and around the city to some harvest, but understanding that it's just not appropriate in some locations and neighborhoods, and so we really need to have the alternative of the shooting proposal, as the chief pointed out. So with that, I'll certainly stand by for questions and be available afterwards if you'd like to visit as well. So thanks very much.
Sir, would you just, for our records, your first and spell your last name too, please?
Sure. It's Keyser, K-E-Y-S-E-R, and the first name is Emmett, E-M-M-E-T-T.
Thank you very much, sir. I think we have Keith Ellenstein yet. Welcome.
Thank you. Keith Ellenstein, City Attorney's Office. I'm here to talk about one portion of the deer management plan, and that is the feeding ban ordinance proposal. What this ban would encompass is something that's similar to what a number of other cities in the state, Pierre and Rapid City as a couple of examples, Sioux City, Iowa, and then various states across the United States have done. And that's in some way, shape, or form discourage citizens from feeding deer for the reasons that have been discussed. Presently, right now, the only thing that's on the books, either at the city or state level, is at the state level, which prohibits individuals from putting out salt blocks. Other than that, there isn't anything on the books that would prohibit anybody from putting out a food source for the purpose of attracting deer. The proposed ordinance that we will bring forward to the council, hopefully here soon, would apply to any owner or occupant of a parcel of land or any person putting any type of an unnatural food source on either their own land, on somebody else's land, or on public property. It would provide for defenses such that if the food source is placed at a minimum of 5 foot high so that it's not easily accessible to deer, so that it allows people to still feed birds and squirrels and things like that. It also would exempt out or provide a defense for people that in good faith were putting out food for a purpose other than feeding deer, such as feeding pets or livestock and things like that. So it does have those affirmative defenses in there to allow those types of behaviors. An unnatural food source would be defined as any amount of grain, fruit, vegetables, nuts, hay, salt, mineral food blocks, or other similar edible material which has the effect of attracting deer for the purpose of eating that material. It would not include growing plants or the natural remainders of those growing plants. So that is, I guess one other part of this ordinance would also still allow, as it was discussed, if there is the lethal removal of deer, those deer would be baited in to make the taking those deer safer for everyone else in the city. This would still exempt out that, so government agencies could still do that type of procedure. This ordinance is very similar to the one that's in effect in Pierre right now. You'll see a gamut of different complexities of these. Some go pages long. This is a fairly short ordinance, which I guess is good for the simplicity. It does leave some opportunity for people to perhaps make a defense when they actually are feeding deer. But again, the purpose of this is to discourage it. We hope we get voluntary compliance out of this. The purpose of this ordinance is not so that our animal control or police department can go out and issue a bunch of citations for doing this. So with that, I would be available for any questions you might have.
Questions? Councillor Erpenbach.
Big bird feeder here. So I have questions about bird feeders. I don't disagree with this idea that we need to ban feeding deer, but how do you define my intent? My intent is to feed birds, but I have bird feeders at different levels. How do you define my intent to feed birds versus deer? Is it the number of feeders I have? Is it the amount of food I have out there? How do we do that?
Yeah, and there are different ordinances out there that talk about you can have so many cubic feet of this and that and so many pounds of this kind of thing. And we talked about doing some of that. The problem is then you have to go out and measure or weigh some of that thing. Again, the way we define it as an unnatural food source is that it has to not only have the effect of feeding the deer, but it also is an affirmative defense if it's placed out there for other reasons. So it's going to have to be circumstantial evidence unless absent an admission by the person. That's the law proves up intent all the time if you can through circumstantial or admissions, and that's how it would have to be. Again, we're going to err on the side of caution. I would imagine that with the education piece that's been going on now, we would also do an education with anybody that, if this were to pass, that was in violation of it, that to take certain steps to maybe raise some of those things up so they're not so attractive to deer, or take certain steps. I don't think the point is to, we've caught you now and here's your citation and that. So again, like I said, it is a bit broad, which leaves some room for interpretation there. But to prove up intent, we'd have to either go upon all the surrounding circumstances and or the mission of the person as to what their intent was.
Okay. One other for Keith, if I could. Talk about the kill plan. Does it require council action? Is that, and maybe Chief Barthel needs to address this. Is that part of the ordinance?
It's not part of the proposed ordinance. At this point, I believe it's an administrative decision. It would require approval of the state in issuing those permits, and those are based upon numbers, as I understand it. But I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe it.
Essentially, it's administrative action with approval of the Game Fish and Parks.
Yes, I believe so.
Correct. Just to use a weapon or a firearm in the city limits would require an exception from the police department, specifically the police chief, so we would authorize ourselves to do that, but to actually shoot wild game like that, we have to have approval from the state. So yeah, that does not require any council action. Really, the only piece in this that requires council action is our proposed feeding ban ordinance change.
Okay, good, thank you. I have a question for Mr. Keiser, but I'll back off until other people have questions.
Anybody else have a question? Councilor Jameson?
Chief, this discussion's been going on a little while. Councilor Aguilar, who used to serve, I remember her bringing it up then. I think the neighborhoods and everybody's kind of gone through a transition of understanding the issue and the cost, and eventually we were going to have to get to banning feeding so that everybody could really understand it. And no improvement has been made, really. Mm-hmm. Nobody has volunteered to change their habits, and the deer have continued to populate essentially in those areas. So something needs to be changed for sure. And like I think you said, a socially acceptable method at first is the right first step. The second step is that night vision, night hawk coming in, just like you said. But if you need volunteers, I could maybe pass a test and I could help you. But when that time comes,
again, it requires the chief's approval. So well, not, you know.
And the other side, on working with the state, the way that you've gone through and counted the deer in a non-scientific fashion, is that acceptable to the state and their methods of the numbers that would be used and what would be?
Well, and I can let Emmett speak to that, but they've actually been helping us with the counts.
Okay,
you know, one piece, just some anecdotal comments. We had one resident who has a fairly large parcel of land for their lot that is up against the river, and I think it might have been last winter or whatever, but at one time they counted over 100 deer on their property in one sitting. So that's just in that piece. So we know that our numbers are definitely on the low end. And another piece that I might add, you know, we're still kind of studying this and trying to determine, do these deer actually live and reside and stay in the city limits all the time, or are they going outside of the city limits and then coming back in? I tend to think that it's probably a little bit of both, but I think a lot of these deer, especially like that example I talked about in that area of town, I think they're born and raised there and they stay there their entire life, so they know no different. But we're working with Game Fish and Parks, and we may possibly experiment with trapping a deer or two and put radio collars on them and actually track their movements and determine, are they leaving the city and coming back and forth. And if that's the case, maybe there's an area where they're generally using, where they come into the city, and perhaps we can, through some fencing or different other methods, you know, try and discourage them from moving in. So that's all a part of it. You know, this won't be a one-year process. Let's say that we ultimately are approved to kill some deer. We aren't going to go in and kill those deer and then we're done. The problem's taken care of. I know Rapid City has been doing this for a number of years, and I think it's kind of a maintenance thing. So it's a learning process as we go too.
Councilor.
I know this is about deer. However, at the same time, has there been any discussion about the big cats? Any sightings of those? Is that been any part of the conversation? I know it is out in the hills, but we've been told they're coming this way. anything with that or no?
I know we've heard of some sightings. I'm not aware of any that are actually living in the city limits. Again, maybe Emma can talk to that a little bit, but I know there have been some coyotes definitely within the city limits, but.
Just curious, I understand the feeding ban to keep them from congregating. Kind of going back to the anecdotal part, do we feel that that'll prevent more deer from coming into town if we don't allow feeding? Is that part of the idea behind that?
Yes, absolutely, especially in the winter months, because now there's all kinds of food that, corn and beans that they can access outside of the city. Once those are harvested and there's a foot of snow on the ground, it's a little more difficult to find their food. And if they know that I come to this yard every day and there's fresh food put out, they're going to go and eat there rather than going outside of the city to look for it. So hopefully if we can reduce that food source in the city, it's going to push the deer that are left out of the city.
And do we have a number of deer that is acceptable in Sioux Falls? I mean, do we have some goal or target, or do the game fish and parks say, we know that there's going to be deer in a city like Sioux Falls. This is an acceptable number, and we're way beyond that. What are we working with here?
Well, we don't have an exact number, and again, ultimately, they will decide that. But I guess for me personally, I would like to see the number of car deer accidents be reduced considerably, as well as just the number of people that are seeing property damage, their complaints go down. I know there are plenty of instances where literally they can't use their backyards because of the deer droppings that are constantly out there every day. So for some of those folks, they're going to want it down to zero. Now, I don't know if we're going to get to that point. Well, I know we won't, but maybe we will in certain areas and push them off to other areas that might be more acceptable.
Councilor Kiley.
Living in the Southeast District, I know firsthand the need to reduce the deer population in that area of town, because anytime you drive down Southeastern Avenue, portions of 57th Street, Cliff Avenue, I mean, especially early morning or evening, more times than not, you have a close encounter, and it's happening more and more frequently. And as the population continues to increase and they exceed the carrying capacity of the area, they're just going to continue to push further and further into the existing neighborhoods. And deer adapt very well to living in urban areas, and they are very much creatures of habit. So if they've got a free meal, they're going to take the easy path, much like people often take the easy path. So, and I did attend the first public meeting, and it was very well attended. I'm assuming the second one was as well attended, or did you have a reduction in numbers with the second?
There weren't quite as many, but there was a good group there.
The first evening, one of the residents that lives south of 57th Street and the Western Avenue or Minnesota Avenue, and it showed me a picture of his backyard, and there was a trail, and not beaten down, but a trail of deer droppings all the way across from one end of the property to the other. It looked like as if somebody had intentionally laid mulch, but instead of mulch, it was droppings. So it is an issue, and as was stated before too, it is just another way for disease to spread throughout the population too. So I think a good management plan is necessary in this case.
Councilor Jameson.
In the education process or the education piece to the public on what they can do to help alleviate deer in their yards, and are there any proposals there that would require city council action as far as changing an ordinance to allow an electric fence, or have you come up with any ideas that you were thinking of but you really didn't want to, would be a lot of work and you didn't want to bring it to the council? Any ideas that we should know about ahead of time to start thinking about the next step?
Not at this point. I think we've taken on quite a bit with this and see how some of this plays out first, and then perhaps maybe if there's some other steps we need to take, but certainly appreciate the offer.
Well, okay, and the idea of the banning, feeding ban, what is it, $100 fine if somebody's caught feeding deer? What's the ticket? Make him clean up all the deer droppings in the neighborhood?
Yeah, technically, all city ordinances are punishable up to $500 fine and up to 30 days in jail. Now,
Up to, right, and
in actuality, this would be a pay-or-appear type of situation, much as a number of the other city ordinances out there would be like a $95 fine, I would imagine, that it would fall in that same category of a $95 fine. Now, if a person were to challenge that and appear in front of a judge, the judge does have the latitude of upping or lowering that fine, but if a person just wanted to pay that, it would be the $95.
Councilor Erpenbach, one more? No?
If I, just to speak a little to the enforcement part of that, I think that was brought up earlier, and just to reinforce what Keith said, our goal here, believe me, is not to go out and write a bunch of tickets. Matter of fact, I see it as more of a tool to educate people not to do it, and at least then there's some consequences if they continue to do it. Most certainly while we first roll this out, because there might be a lot of people that won't be aware of it. So it's a good tool to get to that point. Again, not to see how many tickets we can write. Matter of fact, I envision that being used very little.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thanks to everybody else, too. Councilor Erpenbach.
Mr. Chair, I would move that we adjourn into executive session to discuss personnel matters pursuant to SDCL 125-2, subsection 1.
I second.
Motion to go into executive session and a second. We vote on this? Just voice vote, correct?
I think so.
Yeah. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All righty. We will begin our executive session in 5 minutes, and we will not